Ken Liu's short story, The Paper Menagerie, is an easy and powerful add to your curriculum. Not only does it explore family relationships, the American dream, and identity, themes you can easily connect to other texts as you build units, it introduces, briefly, painfully, powerfully, China's Cultural Revolution. I'll admit I've never studied the history of communism in China with much depth until recently. In college, I took a socialist realist literature course that kicked off a lifelong interest for me in how people are influenced by propaganda. Later, I lived in Bulgaria after the fall of communism there, and my interest only increased as I taught 1984 to students whose families had lived through communism. I visited Memento Park in Budapest, home to dozens of communist sculptures and a terrifying video exhibit about the way the government watched its citizens. I visited the Museum of Communism in Prague, which walks visitors through daily life under communism, as well as showing its frightening extremes. Years later, I moved to Slovakia, where I listened to my son's best friend's father at an Easter brunch tell me how wonderful aspects of life under communism had been years before in the very neighborhood where we were sitting and eating brunch. Yet, despite my interest in learning about communism and propaganda, it was Ken Liu who first made me pay attention to the Cultural Revolution. When his main character reads a letter from his mother about her life in China before she escaped to the United States as a bride in a catalog, it woke me up dramatically. None of the other books I'd ever read throughout so many years of studying and then teaching English had ever really explored this huge event in world history. I thought of this story immediately when a teacher wrote me recently with her request for our new Plan My Lesson series. She asked for a bridge, something that would help her students prepare to read Red Scarf Girl, a memoir of the Cultural Revolution. Since then, I've dipped into Red Scarf Girl until I got so sad that I had to take a break, and I've done a bit of a deep dive into the New York Times exploration of the Cultural Revolution, including 3 particularly striking stories. But then I realized probably most folks aren't going to be able to access the New York Times in class. So I went on and looked at resources on the BBC and Crash Course and the Asian Society and Getty Images. And I built some of those into today's curriculum. Now I'm going to walk you through a lesson on the Paper Menagerie that you can use on its own or as a transition toward Red Scarf Girl if you're teaching it like our teacher requester today. Our goal is to help students build up some understanding of the Cultural Revolution at the same time as they're exploring literature that touches on it. To be honest, I really fell down the rabbit hole on this one, and I feel like I could now spend a month building curriculum around how we know what is true, how propaganda wields influence, the Cultural Revolution, Ken Liu's short story, and Red Scarf Girl. And because the history surrounding these stories and pieces of media is so painful and the repercussions so very real in our world now, it's hard not to feel a tremendous responsibility for students to explore these questions and texts. When I first set out to record this podcast, I thought it was going to be really quick because I had already read The Paper Menagerie, I had already created curriculum around it, but instead, as so often happens, I went very deep and I really discovered that there's so much to say. But at the moment, we're talking about one short lesson period. That's what we're doing in this podcast series, probably about 38 minutes of available classroom time. So for now, let's focus on that. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. If you're hanging out with me this week at Camp Creative, you already know the story of the Paper Menagerie from our materials. It's available in Ken Liu's book, The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories, as well as in full text online from Gizmodo or on Lavar Burton's podcast as an immersive audio experience. There's a little built-in commercial in the middle, by the way, which you will want to skip if you're playing it for your class. For our lesson requester this week, who wants to build a bridge to the Cultural Revolution, this short story is going to act as an introduction for Jiang's memoir, Red Scarf Girl. If you're not familiar with Red Scarf Girl, it's a devastating real-life account of what it was like to be a young student from an educated family as the Cultural Revolution slowly unrolled across China. Okay. So first things first, as ever, as students walk into your classroom, I suggest you have your agenda on the board. This is really going to cut down on questions and help everyone keep to the plan and pacing you're expecting. You can put up the activities and the amount of minutes approximately that you think they're going to take. Then, as your students are all sitting down, I'm going to suggest that you start this lesson by playing 10 minutes of audio from Lavar Burton's version of the Paper Menagerie. This is my suggestion. Your students should have already read the story before this lesson begins. So whether they read it with you the day before, they read it as homework, or they read it a week ago and you've been talking about it ever since, this lesson is meant to build on their prior knowledge and not to be their first experience with the story. So the idea here is that you're just going to play the 10 minutes of audio in which the main character hears his mother's letter. So she is writing to him. He finds the letter after he loses her, after she dies, and he finds somebody to help him translate her story. So this is a letter that's basically like a mini memoir of her life in China. And a stranger that he met on the street who could speak Chinese is translating it aloud to him. And so that's the 10 minutes you're going to play for your students. It starts at minute 38:20 on the podcast and finishes at 47:50. So it's like 9.5 minutes. If you've introduced sketchnoting to your students, which is a strategy, as you may know, that I love, you could invite them to sketchnote the mother's life story as they listen. This is something we have talked about a fair amount in the Lighthouse. This is something we've talked about on this podcast. Sketchnoting can just be a great way to help students stay focused, use their critical thinking as they listen, to be thinking like, well, okay, what's important? What do I need to highlight in my notes? What can I skip? How am I going to kind of create a hierarchy? What's going to be big and bold? What's going to connect to other things on the notes? So it's not just bullet points. It's like they're really creating a visual version of the mother's story here in this letter. Okay, so after the initial 10 minutes of listening and hopefully sketchnoting, I want to suggest that you take a few minutes to have students generate thoughts on 2 different prompts. So you could do this on 2 different whiteboards. You could have partners make a list in their notebooks. Or you can just chat out loud with your students. But I want you to get them thinking about 2 things. What questions do you have after hearing this account? Okay, I know for me, when I first read this story a long time ago, I was thinking, oh my gosh, like this is so shocking. You know, the things that she went through are so shocking. How do I not know more about this history? So your students may be feeling the same. They may be really curious to know, like, how could these things have happened to her? What was happening in China at this time? And then in another area of the board or in their notes, ask them to come up with whatever they already know about the Cultural Revolution. So maybe they saw a special on TV or a little YouTube video, or maybe they've studied it in history class, or maybe they read something else related to it in English. I don't know. You don't know. So have them kind of list everything they can think of that they know, and just spend a few minutes on this, right? You're activating whatever prior knowledge they have, and you're getting them to think about what they wonder, what they want to know, because you're about to move into more of a research part of the class, and it will help if they're building on what they know and looking for what they don't know. Okay, so after you do that for a couple of minutes, it's time for them to learn more about the Cultural Revolution, keeping their questions in mind. So for this activity, I wanted to share strong sources across some different modalities. So I created a visual web quest inviting students to watch overview videos about the Cultural Revolution, hear an audio interview with a former Red Guard, and look at propaganda posters from the era and photos of people from the era. So I'm trying to cover a lot of different modes. And I thought about doing a choice board, but really I didn't want them to choose. I wanted them to look at all the sources that I found because it took forever. And I really felt like each of them had a specific piece of value for students. So I created this little handout on Canva that shows little dotted lines between the sources, and it looks a little bit like a game board. They start at the beginning where they watch a big picture overview video from the BBC called What Was the Cultural Revolution? Then they follow the dotted line to the next thing and they watch 2 minutes of a John Green video on Crash Course that sort of talks about the Cultural Revolution in the context of Chinese politics throughout the 20th century. Then they're going to go and look at some photos from the Cultural Revolution era. Then they're going to see a collection of propaganda posters. Then they're going to listen to an interview with a former Red Guard about his experience in the Cultural Revolution. So I tried to make it kind of like a fun, kicky series of graphics. For this part, students obviously are going to need access to their Chromebook or some kind of media device. If you don't have that available, certainly you could go through these things with them in class. It's just that it can be harder to grasp the attention of the crowd going through them one by one up on your projector. It's not impossible because they're all short, they're all engaging, but when you can let students look on their own time, kind of with their own pacing, maybe they find a particular propaganda poster really interesting and they want to look at it for 90 seconds, or maybe, they are intrigued by one photo and they want to zoom in on it, whatever. It's kind of nice to give them that space to explore it themselves on their own pacing, or maybe with a partner if you aren't 1-to-1 and you can get enough devices to be 2-to-1. So anyway, at the end of this kind of web questy game board, they're going to end with a very small project, okay? A chance for them to kick back some of what they learned. So the prompt down in the corner where it says end here is, what did you learn about the Cultural Revolution? Script a 90-second podcast to teach someone else the basics. So at this point, after they've spent 15 minutes or so doing some background research, you're inviting them to script a short podcast teaching someone else the basics of the Cultural Revolution. Now you can just end it there. Scripting that is not going to take long. You can let them do it alone or with a partner. Or you can double tap on that kind of corner of the screen and use this as a launching point for a larger project. So if you're looking to build in a small amount of research and some speaking practice, you can have them really get into this and create a research podcast about the Cultural Revolution. So this is where I might use a project from the Lighthouse called 90 Seconds Till You Know. And it's basically, really going through the steps to research, script, record, and publish to the class a podcast about anything, whatever they're learning. So in this case, you might ask them to choose a topic from this initial research. Do they want to learn about Mao's Little Red Book, about Mao himself, about the Red Guards, whatever, something they want to drill down on and create a 90-second research podcast. So you can do that if you want. That would lead you now into the next class period. There's no way they're going to do all that now. But if you have a day or two and you want to really get into it with podcasting, that's an option right here. If you're sticking with the short script writing activity, you can just give students the last few minutes of class to finish off their scripts and then get together maybe with a partner or two and share their scripts. By sharing the scripts, they'll get to see what others chose to focus on from the online resources and also just kind of reinforce what they've learned. student scripts could look very different based on all of these sources, right? Some could really focus on one aspect of the Cultural Revolution and others on other aspects. So I think sharing them is a nice way to wrap up. But not quite wrap up. I'm going to have you have them finish with a final question, especially if you're using this as a transition toward Red Scarf Girl, like the teacher who wrote in about this lesson today. So at this point, with 30 seconds left in the class, I would suggest giving everybody a Post-it and having them just pop a question up on the wall. What are you still wondering as we leave this activity on the Cultural Revolution, as we move into a memoir where we're going to hear from a student who was alive in China during the Cultural Revolution? What are you still wondering? Because I know for me, even after having deeply gone down the rabbit hole and spent hours in various coffee shops over the last week, watching media, listening to podcasts, looking at propaganda posters, looking at photos, I'm still wondering, how could this have happened? Okay. Moving in now to the final period of the podcast where we're going to talk about teaching takeaways. So you may or may not be teaching the Paper Menagerie or Red Scarf Girl, but let's talk a little bit about ideas you might get from today's podcast for your next lesson, whatever it is. One of my favorites here is the idea of a media choice board or a web quest. If you want students to research some topic to provide context for whatever you're doing, you know that there's a lot of online garbage out there, right? You can help them keep on a strong research path by providing them with the kinds of links that are worthy of their exploration. So whether you build a little roadmap or game board like I did, or a choice board with the links, adding in a little visual element is fun. You don't have to, but you can. I used Canva to design mine, and it just helped me kind of organize my thoughts and think about the order with which I wanted students to approach the material. That can be a really fun way. I think it's helpful. Certainly there are times when you want to teach students about sources or follow up on lessons they've had about finding good sources and have them find their own. But when you have limited time, I think giving them access to a solid foundation of research instead of saying okay, take what you've learned about good sources and go find your own, is just going to speed up the process, and it's going to guarantee that they get good information. Another of my favorite go-tos featured in this lesson is having students sketch note as they listen to something. In this case, it was listening to an audio version of a story. It could be a podcast, a TED Talk, a mini lecture. It could be a presentation from a classmate. While they're sketchnoting, you can sketchnote too on the board and model ways to capture information and show them that it's not about creating some kind of perfect art, unless, of course, you're an incredible artist, in which case you might just intimidate them and you might have to try not to be so incredible while you're creating your sketchnotes on the board. The point of sketchnotes, as Mike Rohde told me on this podcast, and he is called kind of the inventor of sketchnotes, is that it's about ideas, not art, right? They need to capture the ideas, not create some sort of absolutely stunning drawing that's going to wow everyone. When they sketchnote, they have to sort out what's important. They have to think about how to represent it, and that process helps make the information more memorable. Finally, last but not least, I like that this lesson features a podcast project in either a mini or a full version. Having students script a 90-second podcast with a purpose is, in my opinion, more relevant to their lives than asking them to summarize what they learned in a paragraph. They have lots of chances to do summary paragraphs, right? But either way, a summary paragraph or a 90-second podcast script that teaches the information requires them to synthesize all this research that they've just taken in and share their top takeaways. But a podcast script just has a more obvious purpose and more of a real world feel instead of just okay, I have to do this. And I like that about it. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about this lesson for a Paper Menagerie and build a bridge toward Red Scarf Girl. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative. You know, there's help for when you need print and go creativity for your classroom. There's help when you feel like all you have time to do is dash off comprehension questions, and that's just not the way you want to teach. Did you know I have a curriculum membership for creative ELA teachers? It's like the assistant you've always wished for, the curriculum you need, ready to adapt to your specific classroom. This is my 5th year running the Lighthouse, and I've learned so much from the 2,000 plus teachers who have joined me there, and it just keeps getting better. If you're a secondary ELA teacher looking for more creativity in class without your work bag following you around like a shadow, and you want a creative community that gets what you go through every day, the Lighthouse is waiting for you. This is the program where you get immediate access to curriculum across more than 30 themes, like podcasting, one-pagers, argument, choice reading, book clubs, poetry, and short stories. This is the program where you get a sub-plan library you can lean on anytime you need a day, for any reason. This is the program where you'll find a creative community waiting to cheer your wins and share fresh ideas day after day. This is the program where you'll find on-demand video workshops from leaders across our field, like Penny Kittle and John Spencer. This is the program where I share everything I create. This is the program where we go all in. Are you ready to explore how the Lighthouse can transform your teaching? Make sure you're signed up for my weekly creative teaching emails so you'll get your invitation the next time the doors open.